An intimate portrait. Gloria Vanderbilt. The name brings to mind images of wealth, glamour, fashion, blue jeans. From the time she was a child, Gloria Vanderbilt has been a fixture in the public's eye and imagination. America first came to know Gloria as the poor little rich girl, subject of the most famous custody trial of the century. Later, Gloria's romances and marriages made headlines. Howard Hughes, Frank Sinatra, Leopold Stokowski. Not content to be just an idle heiress, Gloria focused her incredible energy on the arts she loved. First painting, then acting and writing. And in the 1970s came her most successful venture, Gloria Vanderbilt Jeans, which put a swan in almost every woman's closet. Throughout her life, Gloria has been haunted by tragedy. A life without a mother, an abusive first husband, the death of a true love, a son's suicide. Through it all, Gloria has drawn on the legacy of other strong Vanderbilt women who stunned the world with their glamorous lifestyles. Today, she remains the most famous and celebrated Vanderbilt descendant of what was once the richest family in America, born into a legacy of mansions and high society balls. Tonight on Lifetime, a revealing look at an extraordinary woman. Gloria Vanderbilt, an intimate portrait, is next. September 1934. Americans are struggling through the 5th year of a crippling depression. Families across the country battle daily for survival. But when they open their newspapers each day, it's another battle that fascinates, one being fought far from the breadlines. In a courtroom in Manhattan, a mother and an aunt make their bids for the life and millions of a 10-year-old girl, the heiress Gloria Vanderbilt.
This was the O.J. trial of the decade. Everybody was concerned about it.
The famous child custody case that just dominated the newspapers when she was a very, very young person gave her sort of an aura about her. She was someone that everybody knew her name.
By the time of the trial in 1934, the name Vanderbilt was synonymous with vast self-made wealth and extraordinary women. As the great-great-granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, Gloria would someday inherit $5 million of the infamous robber baron's estate. At 10 years old, Gloria became part of a long line of Vanderbilt women whose lives were complicated by Cornelius's money. Cornelius Vanderbilt began his shipping business in 1810 with one boat. By the end of the 19th century, he was one of the richest men in the country. His ruthlessness earned him the nickname Commodore. In 1813, Cornelius married Sophia Johnson. They settled in a house on Staten Island. As the years passed and the Commodore's fortune and fame grew, so did his desire to be accepted by New York high society. To that end, he built a mansion in Manhattan and ordered Sophia to move to the new house.
About the same time she was entering menopause, and the Commodore was becoming more interested in the family maids, certainly possibly pinching them now and then, and maybe even going further than that. And as a result of Sophia's growing disenchantment with him, he actually had her locked up and put into an asylum.
After 18 months, neither Sophia's physicians nor her family would allow her to remain in the asylum. Against the Commodore's wishes, she was released. Sophia quietly moved to the mansion in Manhattan. The old money society of the Astors continued to ignore the Vanderbilts. As Sophia was adjusting to life in Manhattan and the Commodore was adding railroads to his empire, a feisty girl was being born in Alabama. In 1875, that well-brought-up Southern girl, Alva Smith, married Willie K. Vanderbilt, one of the Commodore's grandsons. Alva brought a new spirit to the Vanderbilt clan, a spirit that even the Astors couldn't ignore.
She was a bulldog. She called herself that. She was short and stocky. Now, of course, it was good for women to be a little plump back then, and she would not be considered that attractive today.
Alva resented the fact that the Vanderbilts were snubbed by New York's old money society, then dominated by Mrs. Caroline Astor. The Commodore and the Vanderbilts were seen as rough and unsophisticated. Alva made it her personal crusade to gain respectability for the Vanderbilt name. She built huge mansions on Fifth Avenue, each one bigger than the next. But Mrs. Astor and her friends considered the size of the Vanderbilt homes and the open display of their riches vulgar. Still, Alva would not be stopped.
She determined that she would make the Vanderbilts the head of the aristocracy, the head of the American royalty. And her main ploy was to bring Caroline Astor to her knees. So what Alva did was hold the most famous masked ball of the century and did not invite Caroline Astor.
Caroline Astor was furious. She realized she had to be at the Vanderbilt ball. She called on Alva and wheedled an invitation from her. When the Astors arrived at the ball, Alva had won. The Vanderbilts were finally accepted into New York society. In the 1890s, thanks to Alva, Cornelius Vanderbilt's great-granddaughters, Consuelo and Gertrude, found themselves socializing in the highest of New York society.
Consuelo was a gorgeous, slim, swan-like creature, very, very bright. She passed the exams to go to Oxford, but her mother wanted Consuelo to be a princess, and she decided upon the Duke of Marlborough.
Alva wanted her daughter to have a royal title, so she made a deal to rebuild the Duke's crumbling palace and to give him a dowry worth millions of dollars. And Consuelo became a duchess at 18. Consuelo's cousin Gertrude was a passionate young woman who became a noted sculptor. Even while married, she continued to study in Paris, where she lived a bohemian life. Consuelo and Gertrude continued the tradition of remarkable Vanderbilt women.
There was a Vanderbilt look. It was slightly oriental, sort of eyes that went up.
In the early 1920s, the look and legend of the Vanderbilts would be forever changed by the beautiful twins, Gloria and Thelma Morgan.
Their father was a minor American diplomat, and their mother, who was of Spanish heritage, was a harridan, a social climber, very manipulative with all her children, constantly pushing them and abusing them in various ways. The girls had been raised in convents very properly, and at the age of around 17 or 18, moved to New York with the family, and suddenly were cast into the jazz age.
Gloria and Thelma Morgan made their unofficial debut in New York's cafe society in the early 1920s. With their mother's blessing, the twins moved to Greenwich Village. They were determined to marry, and it didn't matter who, as long as he was wealthy.
They were slim, brunettes, had wonderful carriage and an interesting way of talking with that Castilian lisp that enchanted everyone who met them. One of the men that fascinated them was Reggie Vanderbilt. And although he was very sick even then with alcoholism and had gambled millions and millions of dollars away, he was, nonetheless, quite a catch.
In 1923, 41-year-old Reggie Vanderbilt proposed to 18-year-old Gloria Morgan. Gloria said yes, and the rarely sober, always affable Reggie took her home for his mother Alice's approval.
I think Alice hoped that Gloria might help stabilize Reggie. Reggie was her only surviving son, her youngest son, and her favorite.
Reggie told Gloria that he was both broke and ill from heavy drinking. He would not be able to have children. Gloria married him anyway. And to their great surprise, she soon became pregnant. In February 1924, Gloria delivered a daughter by cesarean section, rare in the 20s. Within weeks of the birth, the new parents left their baby, also named Gloria, with her nanny. Then Reggie took his young wife to Europe.
She always said that she was scared of me from the beginning. She really shouldn't have had a child. I mean, some women really shouldn't. And it is true that she really was not there when I was growing up. She really wasn't there. But I was very contented because I had this adoring nurse who I loved and who really was a surrogate mother to me.
None of us had wonderful, comfy mothers with flour up to their elbows for baking pies or anything. The mothers sort of saw us maybe at breakfast time and at tea time and said, okay, that's that.
When little Gloria was 18 months old, Reggie's drinking brought on a massive hemorrhage. He died in bed at age 44, leaving his teenage bride with nothing but debts.
She has to sell the house and all of the belongings, even Gloria's baby carriage, in order to pay off Reggie's bills. Now, there is a separate inheritance for the baby, and it's the income from that the mother and the child are to live on.
She received an allowance of more than $4,000 a month from little Gloria's $5 million trust fund, vastly more money than the average American made in 1925. Secure in her income, she and her sister Thelma went to Europe to live and play among the rich. Little Gloria and her nanny Dodo traveled with the two sisters.
Well, the only sense of place that I had was with my grandmother Morgan and with my nurse, because they were always there. And I used to always feel we were living in this quite wonderful caravan and traveling all over the world in it.
Gloria Morgan rented a home in Paris, but she often visited her sister Thelma in England, who was then having an affair with the Duke of Windsor.
She knew the part of British aristocracy that was somewhat dissolute, where there were a lot of sexual shenanigans. There's evidence of her going around with some of the lesbian element of this part of society. And the stories naturally got back to the Vanderbilts over the years.
Gloria spent much of her childhood on ocean liners crossing the Atlantic between Europe and America. During the long days at sea, she daydreamed about the father she had barely known.
When I used to travel to Europe a lot, I had fantasies that he had written me a letter and that I was going to receive this letter from him, and it would explain to me why he had left, why he had died. Because, of course, I did feel it was my fault, even though I was not aware of it then in the way that I am now.
In 1932, a bout of tonsillitis left 8-year-old Gloria in New York while her mother returned to Europe. Aunt Gertrude, who had not seen the child in 6 years, was distressed by her sickly appearance and stepped in to help her niece. She suggested that Gloria live with her at the estate on Long Island. Gloria's mother, more interested in parties than in staying home with her daughter, quickly agreed. Neither she nor her Aunt Gertrude realized that they were paving the way for the custody trial of the century. When we return, the battle for the heart, mind, and fortune of 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt. Turn to Gloria Vanderbilt, an intimate portrait. For most of her childhood, Gloria traveled through Europe with her mother. At age 8, she finally found a home with her Aunt Gertrude on Long Island. Gloria's mother returned to Europe, but the Vanderbilts read about her wild activities in the gossip columns. Little Gloria spent her days exploring the vast estate on which her aunt had built houses for her grown children.
They were all, of course, separated by forests and roads, so it wasn't as if they were neighbors in the sense of having a house nearby. And then there was an indoor swimming pool and tennis court and carpentry shop, stables. It was also a farm. It was its own country, really, and I always thought of it as something in a fairy tale, really.
Gloria's nanny, Dodo, lived with her on the estate. Dodo provided the love and support that Aunt Gertrude was unable to show. Though Gertrude certainly cared for her niece, her aloof manner intimidated little Gloria and her friends.
She used to wear a hat that looked like a log, and then she had the mouth that was circular and bright red, and then from that there were all these little lines where the red would run out into the rest of her face.
Aunt Gertrude sent Gloria to the exclusive Green Vale School. There, Gloria's test results revealed her lack of education. Gloria's academic standing was only one of Aunt Gertrude's concerns about her niece.
She was underweight and seemed to have a nervousness about her, a lot of a tendency to be afraid of things, and was just not a calm, happy child.
Gloria's mother was still collecting a monthly income from her daughter's trust fund. In the spring of 1933, Gloria Morgan was informed that her allowance would be reduced since her daughter was not living with her. In a panic, she returned to the States from abroad and hired a lawyer who offered a very simple suggestion: take back your child. Gloria Morgan filed for guardianship of her daughter. Aunt Gertrude believed that Gloria was better off away from her mother. She knew of Gloria Morgan's irresponsible character and had heard rumors of her immoral behavior. Gertrude's view of her sister-in-law had also been poisoned by letters she had received from Gloria when the child still lived with her mother. In the letters, Gloria said she was unhappy in England, while her mother enjoyed herself in Paris. Gertrude did not realize that Gloria's grandmother Morgan and her beloved nanny Dodo had directed the child to write the letters. Mrs. Morgan was angry because her daughter had threatened to cut off her allowance. Confused and manipulated, little Gloria wrote the letters because she was afraid of losing the love of her nanny and her grandmother.
I felt very terrified and also very, my grandmother Morgan really did manipulate me to be afraid of my mother, and it was difficult, you know.
The battle between Gloria Morgan and Aunt Gertrude for the custody of 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt began in October 1934. All three appeared in New York State Supreme Court almost every day for 2 months. Like her aunt, little Gloria put on a solemn face for the daily walk past shouting spectators and pushy reporters. Fortunately, no audience was allowed in the hearing.
When I testified, I talked to the judge in his chambers. So I was not on a witness stand in a courtroom.
Every newspaper in the country covered the trial that pitted the rich and glamorous Gloria Morgan against the rich and stoic Gertrude Whitney. Even the national newspapers took sides. Crowds gathered daily outside the courthouse and shouted their advice to little Gloria.
They would yell at Gloria, stand by your mother, don't be cruel to your mother.
There's also these incredible newsreels of her sort of going to and from the courthouse. She's surrounded by these sort of bodyguards in fedoras, and one guy sort of jumps in front of the camera to kind of shield her. When I look at that, there's just an incredible sense of how sort of alone she was. And, you know, she was this 10-year-old girl sort of surrounded by, you know, 7 big guys who probably didn't care about her. And it seems like many of the adults at that time didn't really care much about her.
One of the things that fascinated the public about me was that the whole thing of a poor little rich girl is I'm talking from a tabloid standpoint, that is defined. It means here's this child who has everything, but she's deprived of her family's love, so she really has nothing. However, that was really not the case, because I had the love of my nurse, who was like a mother, and also my grandmother.
Gloria's letters about her mother were leaked to the press and published in the tabloids. Their content shocked America. In one letter, Gloria said, "My mother is so bad to me. I wish I could run away to New York to you. I am an unlucky girl." The letters, along with Gloria's testimony about her unhappiness living with her mother, did not help Gloria Morgan's case. Still, the courts rarely took a child away from the biological mother. It was when Gloria Morgan was accused of having lesbian relationships that she lost little Gloria. The judge reluctantly awarded custody to Aunt Gertrude and gave Gloria's mother limited visitation rights. Throughout the trial, little Gloria clung to the belief that no matter what happened, at least her nanny Dodo would remain with her. The cruelest blow to Gloria came when the judge ordered Dodo to have no further contact with her. Not only had the little girl lost her biological mother, she had also lost the only stable, loving presence she had ever known.
Oh, it was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to me. It was just a terrible, terrible thing.
Little Gloria began her new life without her mother. She continued to live on the estate with her Aunt Gertrude, who rarely paid her any attention. Though lonely, Gloria lived as normally as possible. She had friends, rode horses, and began showing her creative side by designing costumes for school.
She came as St. Joan once, and her whole body was covered with little round silver discs, which were really the tops of tin cans with a hole punched in them and sewn on, and she looked absolutely marvelous in this.
Gloria's mother continued to live her carefree lifestyle after the trial. By the time Gloria reached age 13, her mother and Aunt Thelma had become fixtures of the Hollywood party set. Aunt Gertrude allowed young Gloria to go west for a visit, where she was immediately entranced with all the movie stars she met.
I was absolutely dazzled. And I had a whole perception from the movies that this is the way it was going to be when I grew up. And I couldn't wait. Then the second time I went out was when I was 17. I went out for 2 weeks. My aunt allowed me to go, and I never went back. My mother really gave me, I think, too much freedom. And I started, dating mostly actors, because that's what impressed me the most.
Gloria started dating millionaire Howard Hughes, then in his late 30s. Hughes was producing movies at the time and had a reputation for liking young women. He treated Gloria like a starlet and swept her off her feet.
Well, he was wonderful. I was really crazy about him. And he used to take me in his airplane and fly around and to Catalina and on picnics, and we really had a wonderful time.
Like many young women before her, Gloria took Hughes's promise of marriage seriously. Before too long, however, she found Hughes gone and herself alone. On the rebound, the 17-year-old began dating one of Hughes's glorified gophers, 34-year-old Pat DeSico. Gloria soon found out that beneath DeSico's handsome exterior lurked the soul of a tyrant. When we return, the terror and abuse of Gloria's first marriage. Gloria Vanderbilt, an intimate portrait. At 17, Gloria Vanderbilt found herself in the dream world of Hollywood, far away from the strict, isolated life at Aunt Gertrude's. Gloria's mother, too busy with her own good times, let the teenager do as she pleased.
Among the people that I met was Pat DeSico. He was a very witty, funny, extroverted man who actually looked very much, and in his manner was very much like Dean Martin in his glamour years.
DeSico was somewhat of, I'd say, a gangster. There were questions about him being involved in the murder of his previous wife, Thelma Todd. There were rumors that his basic job for Howard Hughes was procuring women. He was a gambler. He was a drinker. He was handsome, but in a very unseemly way.
I started seeing him, and my aunt wanted me to come back to live with her, and I didn't want to go back to living that very restricted kind of life, and I didn't want to go back to my mother, and I wanted to do something that would really make Aunt Gertrude angry. And so I, at 17, did get married.
On a rainy day in December 1941, Gloria dressed in wedding white for the first time and became Mrs. Pat DeSico. The groom did not kiss the bride during the ceremony. Then the unexpected started during Gloria and Pat's honeymoon and continued through their marriage.
he would get into these violent rages for really no reason at all. And, you know, he'd say, oh, you've got a pimple on your face, which I didn't, you know, and I'd go to try to look and find it. What is it with you? It's the badness coming out in you. You know, it'd take me and bang my head against the wall and that kind of thing. But I really did, in the end, get very frightened of him. And I got very, very scared of him.
Gloria could not turn to her mother, who offered little emotional support, even in the best of times. And Gloria's rebellious marriage had alienated Aunt Gertrude and her family. With nowhere to turn, Gloria remained in the marriage for 3 years.
I don't really consider it a marriage. I mean, we were married, but I don't know, it certainly doesn't count with me.
In what were the last days of her marriage to DeSico, Gloria, now 20, went to New York alone. At a dinner party there, she met the man who would become her next husband, 62-year-old conductor Leopold Stokowski.
They met, actually, in my apartment on 97th Street. I remember this because Leopold was totally charming and wonderful.
Gloria fell in love with the charismatic conductor, a man 40 years her senior.
I don't believe in chronological age, and the difference in our ages really, we were together for 12 years.
Though taken by surprise, Pat DeSico did not fight the divorce. He sent word to Gloria that a $200,000 payment would set her free. Gloria paid. The day after the divorce came through, Gloria married Leopold Stokowski.
Stokowski was magnetic and knew how to play that magnetism. He was a man who was larger than life in many ways.
Leopold encouraged Gloria's writing, and Gloria accompanied Leopold to his concerts all over the country. After the birth of 2 sons, first Stan and then Chris, Gloria began longing for a permanent home. But Stokowski expected Gloria to leave everything, including the children, to travel with him and care for him.
And I'd always loved to really paint more than anything. And actually, Stokowski was very supportive of that and very encouraging to me in that. He was not supportive, really, of my wanting to be an actress.
Gloria pursued an acting career despite Leopold's disapproval. In 1954, 6 years into the marriage, Gloria made her stage debut in a summer stock version of Molnar's The Swan. Reviewers gave her good notices, mentioning in particular Gloria's poise and enunciation. From then on, the tall and willowy Gloria Vanderbilt appeared regularly in the theater and on television. Leopold's obvious disdain of Gloria's acting career did not help their marriage. Worse, Gloria discovered that her husband had lied to her.
He told me that he was from Poland, and he sort of implied that he was maybe an illegitimate child of the Habsburgs. And then later, of course, I found out that he was born in England and from a Cockney background. And the sad thing about it is that I really would have loved him even more than I did had he told me the truth.
The marriage could not survive this betrayal of trust. For a year, Gloria told Stokowski that she wanted a divorce.
He said that he would never let me go. And he, to me, was such a godlike, powerful figure. I absolutely believed him, and I felt really trapped in this situation.
Gloria finally found the courage to leave her husband when she began dating Frank Sinatra.
I needed somebody to rescue me, and he was the one that came along. Now, if it had been somebody that wasn't as well known or as powerful in his way, I probably wouldn't have walked out the door.
Her marriage to Leopold Stokowski ended quietly in a friendly divorce toward the end of 1955. Now, at 31, twice divorced, and the loving mother of 2 sons, Gloria Vanderbilt was about to start the most exciting, creative, and romantic time of her life. When we return, Gloria finds true love at last. An intimate portrait. Now 31 and divorced from her second husband, Leopold Stokowski, Gloria felt free to follow her muse. Soon after the divorce, she published a book of poetry entitled Love Poems. Gloria now vigorously pursued her acting career, and it blossomed on stage and television.
But there was no dilettante thing about her being an actress. That's what she wanted to be at that time, and she took it very, very seriously.
Hot young theater director Sidney Lumet cast Gloria in the New York stage version of Picnic. The two shared a devotion to the theater and a dedication to hard work. Soon, Gloria began seeing Lumet outside of the theater as well.
I met Sidney in March, and we fell in love instantly.
In the summer of 1956, Sidney Lumet became Gloria's 3rd husband. During her marriage to Lumet, Gloria found herself involved in yet another custody battle, this time as a parent. Her ex-husband, Leopold Stokowski, aging and alone, decided that he needed sons Stan and Chris with him. As in 1934, the newspapers aired the grievances of both sides. In the end, Gloria retained full custody of her sons. Her marriage to Sidney Lumet, which lasted 7 years, ended as quietly as it had begun. Gloria does not reveal much about the marriage or why it fell apart.
Well, you know, just because a marriage ends doesn't mean it wasn't happy. And I love him dearly and all was well, yeah.
But Gloria soon met her true Prince Charming in writer Wyatt Cooper. 3 years younger than the 39-year-old heiress, the handsome, affectionate Southerner gave Gloria unqualified love and support. On Christmas Eve, 1963, 4 months after her divorce from Lumet, Gloria and Cooper were married.
Well, we both wanted the same things, which was to have a family together. I think he understood my childhood, and also when I met him, it was the same time that I was reconciling with my mother.
One of the reunions that Gloria had with her mother was brought about by my wife. And because Gloria was visiting, and somehow this meeting took place. They were remarkable ladies, those Morgan twins. You know, Gloria looks fragile and is not. Her mother was fragile. And her mother was never sort of in charge of her life the way Gloria has been in charge of her life.
Mother and daughter had neither seen nor spoken to each other in 18 years. By the time of their meeting in 1964, Gloria's mother was frail and blind. Their reunion came just in time. Gloria's mother died of cancer shortly after the two reconciled.
My husband, Wyatt Cooper, when he met her, said, "This woman doesn't know one single thing that's ever happened to her." And it was so true. She was the most gentle. She, it was all just a terrible mistake, you know, what happened. But I did get to know her a little bit before she died. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Gloria was also grateful for Wyatt Cooper's support of every facet of her creativity. When Gloria began designing home furnishings and textiles, he suggested she sign her creations Gloria Vanderbilt rather than Mrs. Wyatt Cooper. Gloria's life really became complete when, in her 40s, she gave birth to 2 more sons, Carter and Anderson. For over a decade, Gloria lived the full life she had always longed for, that of wife, mother, and artist. Then, in 1976, Wyatt suffered his first heart attack. 2 years later came another attack, this one fatal. At 50, Gloria's Prince Charming was dead. Gloria herself broke the news to sons Carter and Anderson.
Well, the night he died on the operating table, it was midnight, and I went home and woke them up and told them. And it was hard to believe, you know.
She sat down on the bed and I remember she was crying, and I think she said, Daddy died.
I didn't think he was going to die. I really didn't. I didn't. I was in what's called denial for a very, very long time. And I kept thinking he's away on a trip and he's going to come back. But he didn't.
Though numbed by her beloved Wyatt's death, Gloria did not shut herself away from the world. Instead, she plunged into a new venture, one that would be her most commercially lucrative. Now in her 50s, Gloria Vanderbilt, heiress and socialite, found national success marketing blue jeans.
Here was the first time that a woman of her name and stature was actually doing something that would appeal to the masses, and it had an immediate effect.
By the late 1970s, Gloria Vanderbilt jeans outsold every other brand. Everyone knew her trademark logo, the swan.
Closet full. These pants fit you everywhere.
Gloria became a household name and face after appearing in television commercials for her jeans.
Perhaps the fact that the name Vanderbilt associated with something as pedestrian and maybe as lowly as the so-called jean, but the idea of the combination of the two was very appealing to the public.
With one of my terrific blouses, it's a $1 million look.
Gloria inherited millions from her family.
That money really never had reality to me, and the money that does have reality and did is the money that I've made through my own ability. And I've made many times over what I inherited, so I feel, I mean, that money has reality to me because I worked for it.
Unfortunately, Gloria trusted the wrong people with her hard-earned money and, as a result, lost millions. When we return, Gloria witnesses the horrifying death of her son. After 12 happily married years, Gloria's fourth husband, the man she loved more than any other, was dead. Gloria now faced her toughest test of emotional survival.
After Wyatt died, I started seeing a therapist, and I trusted him, of course.
Gloria's psychiatrist insisted she hire a strong lawyer to look after the new fortune she made from her line of blue jeans.
I did go with the lawyer, and he was my not only lawyer, he was my business manager.
Once again, Gloria's trust was misplaced. Unknown to her, the lawyer and psychiatrist were secret partners who mismanaged her money. To pay millions in back taxes, she was forced to sell her homes in New York and Long Island. Disillusioned with the world of fashion, she turned to writing and began working on her autobiography. The first volume, Once Upon a Time, was published in 1985, followed several years later by Black Night, White Night.
Of course, the other great attribute in her writing is the fact that she has total recall. She seems to remember things that happened when she was really a very, very little child.
The 1980s brought a brief period of stability to Gloria's life. She wrote and painted and raised her two sons, Carter and Anderson. Then, on a hot July day in 1988, Gloria suffered the most tragic event of her life. She and 23-year-old Carter were spending the day together in her apartment in New York.
Well, he had said he was going to move back home. He had a job he liked very much, and it was unbearably hot. He had been asleep, and he never liked to sleep in the afternoon.
Carter seemed dazed when he awoke. He walked through the apartment and climbed out onto the edge of the balcony. Gloria begged him to come back into the room. He would not. Suddenly, Carter jumped 14 floors to his death.
It all happened absolutely out of nowhere, and it's a very terrible thing. Something just clicked in him, and there's nothing. Of course, I agonize over thinking of what maybe I could have done, but I think, I don't think there's anything anyone could have done. He was seeing a therapist then, and the therapist couldn't believe it. It was the last person that he ever thought would. You know, something just clicked inside of him.
The police report said that Carter was being treated for depression at the time of his death.
It seemed to me it was hardly a week before his death that he came here and talked to me about being a writer. And it was a terrible loss, terrible.
I don't even like to think about it. You know, I knew Carter pretty well. I was around at the time that happened, and I was worried about Gloria. She went through a very bad time.
Well, I just would have, I would have gone with him because, but I couldn't have done that because of Anderson. And it was just an instinctive, I mean, it shot through my mind.
And I remember in the days after my brother killed himself, both she and I remember sort of felt like we were on a lifeboat, and that some people could sort of climb aboard and kind of go through it with us, and other people weren't able to. It was, it was certainly a huge sort of a transforming event.
Getting over Carter's death took a very long time. Recently, Gloria worked through some of the pain by writing A Mother's Story.
It was to include, of course, the ultimate loss, which is the loss of a child. But it was also going to include loss of parent, loss of husband, loss of lover, loss of home, loss of money, all the losses. But it is specifically about the loss of my son. And I wanted to try to convey that one can have something happen that is so terrible you think you can't live, and yet you can, and you should, and you must.
And now I look at my mom, and I'm incredibly thankful for the stuff that she was able to impart to me. And it wasn't sort of the traditional stuff of, you know, how to make cookies, or how to, do my laundry, or, ride a bike or something. It was a sort of a vision of myself, which is something that I think that she and my father had for me and gave to me.
I believe that we have to cherish the pain that we experience as we cherish the joy, because without one, there wouldn't be the other, and it's what makes us alive. And I think that's very, very important.
Gloria Vanderbilt.
Today, the mansions are gone and the Vanderbilts are scattered across the country. While not as wealthy as she once was, Gloria lives quite comfortably in New York with her son Anderson. At 72, the Commodore's great-great-granddaughter spends her time, as she always has, writing, meeting with friends, being Gloria, the same Gloria who walked into the courthouse amid jeering crowds some 60 years ago. The poor little rich girl's life of tragedy and triumph has taught her how to survive. And as with everything else, Gloria Vanderbilt does it in her own elegant way.
A senseless crime. A cry for justice.
I need a witness.
All alone, against the odds, he's in for the fight of his life.
What the hell have we gotten into?
A stoning in Fulham County.
Tonight at 9 p.m., here on Lifetime.
A Lifetime intimate portrait.
A feisty girl was being born in Alabama. In 1875, that well-brought-up Southern girl, Alva Smith, married Willie K. Vanderbilt, one of the Commodore's grandsons. Alva brought a new spirit to the Vanderbilt clan, a spirit that even the Astors couldn't ignore.
She was a bulldog. She called herself that. She was short and stocky. Now, of course, it was good for women to be a little plump back then, and she would not be considered that attractive today.
Alva resented the fact that the Vanderbilts were snubbed by New York's old money society, then dominated by Mrs. Caroline Astor. The Commodore and the Vanderbilts were seen as rough and unsophisticated. Alva made it her personal crusade to gain respectability for the Vanderbilt name. She built huge mansions on Fifth Avenue, each one bigger than the next. But Mrs. Astor and her friends considered the size of the Vanderbilt homes and the open display of their riches vulgar. In 1813, Cornelius married Sophia Johnson. They settled in a house on Staten Island. As the years passed and the Commodore's fortune and fame grew, so did his desire to be accepted by New York high society. To that end, he built a mansion in Manhattan and ordered Sophia to move to the new house.
About the same time she was entering menopause, and the Commodore was becoming more interested in the family maids, certainly possibly pinching them now and then, and maybe even going further than that. And as a result of Sophia's growing disenchantment with him, he actually had her locked up and put into an asylum.
After 18 months, neither Sophia's physicians nor her family would allow her to remain in the asylum. Against the Commodore's wishes, she was released. Sophia quietly moved to the mansion in Manhattan. The old money society of the Astors continued to ignore the Vanderbilts. As Sophia was adjusting to life in Manhattan and the Commodore was adding railroads to his empire, an intimate portrait. Gloria Vanderbilt. The name brings to mind images of wealth, glamour, fashion, blue jeans. From the time she was a child, Gloria Vanderbilt has been a fixture in the public's eye and imagination. America first came to know Gloria as the poor little rich girl, subject of the most famous custody trial of the century. Later, Gloria's romances and marriages made headlines. Howard Hughes, Frank Sinatra, Leopold Stokowski. Not content to be just an idle heiress, Gloria focused her incredible energy on the arts she loved. First painting, then acting and writing. And in the 1970s came her most successful venture, Gloria Vanderbilt Jeans, which put a swan in almost every woman's closet. Throughout her life, Gloria has been haunted by tragedy. A life without a mother, an abusive first husband, the death of a true love, a son's suicide. Through it all, Gloria has drawn on the legacy of other strong and aunt make their bids for the life and millions of a 10-year-old girl, the heiress Gloria Vanderbilt.
This was the O.J. trial of the decade. Everybody was concerned about it.
The famous child custody case that just dominated the newspapers when she was a very, very young person gave her sort of an aura about her. She was someone that everybody knew her name.
By the time of the trial in 1934, the name Vanderbilt was synonymous with vast self-made wealth and extraordinary women. As the great-great-granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, Gloria would someday inherit $5 million of the infamous robber baron's estate. At 10 years old, Gloria became part of a long line of Vanderbilt women whose lives were complicated by Cornelius's money. Cornelius Vanderbilt began his shipping business in 1810 with one boat. By the end of the 19th century, he was one of the richest men in the country. His ruthlessness earned him the nickname Commodore. Innate Vanderbilt women who stunned the world with their glamorous lifestyles. Today, she remains the most famous and celebrated Vanderbilt descendant of what was once the richest family in America, born into a legacy of mansions and high society balls. Tonight on Lifetime, a revealing look at an extraordinary woman. Gloria Vanderbilt, an intimate portrait, is next. September 1934. Americans are struggling through the 5th year of a crippling depression. Families across the country battle daily for survival. But when they open their newspapers each day, it's another battle that fascinates, one being fought far from the breadlines. In a courtroom in Manhattan, a mother and